This is a response to Veritas 48's argument from Facts of Normativity. We all agree there's a thing called rationality and a thing called morality. These two things, however, are best understood in the form of an ought. In terms of rationality, one ought to do this because it makes more sense. In the sense of morality, one ought to do this because it is the way you should do it. And Veritas contends the best way that this can be accounted for, the sense of oughtness, would be if there is a design on the world, at least in terms of rationality and morality, that was formed by a designer of some sort. And Veritas further explains his point by using an example of car brakes. Namely, if you're driving your car and your brakes aren't working properly, you would say something like they ought to work properly. And the only reason why you would say this is because they were made by, let's just say, a brake maker. The first confusion I have is over what exactly he means by morality. Now, granted, this might be a little nitpicky, but it is kind of important to, you could say, define your terms a little bit. For example, he seems to be working with the idea of morality already being this all-encompassing immaterial force that could guide us if we allow it to. However, let's say morality is just the belief that something is right and wrong, like the personal human belief that something is right and that something is wrong. Well, if that's all morality amounts to, then morality can easily be accounted for by our brains, which would then mean that all one means when one says one ought to do this is what I would prefer you to do, or this is how I would prefer it to be, as opposed to this is how it should be. The second confusion I have, which is a confusion that seems to be shared by at least the first few video posters, is over his use of the word ought, because he seems to be using it in a very peculiar way, in the sense that ought implies some sort of obligation to do it this way. However, as many has pointed out, ought only makes sense in terms of the goal you want. For example, let's use rationality. Let's say you have a rational way of doing something, and someone's doing it the irrational way, and you say, "Oh, you ought to do it this way." But then he replies, "Why?" And you say it's more rational, and then this guy would just say, "Oh, but I don't want to do it the rational way. That's no fun. It's more fun to do it irrational." Well, now the ought is gone because his goal is not to be rational anymore. A possible response to this might be, yes, someone could choose to be rational or even choose to be immoral, but in order for the idea of something being immoral or irrational to make sense, would be if there is some sort of rational or moral design upon the world. So simply pointing out that people can choose to be the opposite is not really hurting the case. Perhaps, but he is talking about oughts as in something you should do. So if this is going to be a response, then you're pretty much reducing rationality and morality to simple description, since all you have now is an is as opposed to an ought. This actually reminds me of a funny story of how the Lamborghini supercar like the Gallardo Murcielago came into existence. Way back when, in the 60s, when cars were driven by real engines, not nitrous injected turbo boosted nonsense, a man with the last name of Lamborghini bought a car from a man called Enzo Ferrari. Lamborghini, however, was somewhat unhappy with the car. He really didn't like the clutch. He felt it wasn't working right. So he took the car back to Enzo Ferrari and requested that he fix the clutch or change the clutch. But Enzo's response was, now I'm paraphrasing, "Shut up, it's perfect, go make your own car if you're unhappy." And guess what? That's what Lamborghini did, and that's why we have the Murcielago and Gallardo, and my personal favorite, the Countach. I I bring up this story for two reasons. One, this one seems to be more about what you're after in terms of ought, like a more all-encompassing this is how something should be regardless of what you believe. But more importantly, it's presenting the main problem with the type of example you use to illustrate your point. Not so much because he went to the designer and talked to the designer, rather because he disagreed with the designer and then just did his own thing and became a success because of it. And it seems unlikely to me that this is how you view your designer, as a being that can be challenged and even bettered at their own game. Since this would imply that, yes, there is some sort of moral design on the world, but if we disagree with the moral design, we could change it and do whatever we want, which in a certain way kind of makes the whole design thing irrelevant and pointless. Since if we can make our own morality, just as Lamborghini can make his own car with the perfect clutch, what need is there to account for morality with anything other than our own minds and actions?